A country can change a government overnight. It can rewrite an agreement in a matter of months. It can take control of a mine, purchase new machinery, or begin building a highway. But there is one thing no government can build overnight: a generation of citizens prepared to carry the nation forward. That may be the real story unfolding in Burkina Faso. In 2025, nearly 1,700 children participated across reported cohorts of Camp Vacances Faso Mêbo. Many were between 10 and 15 years old. Instead of spending their entire vacation at home, these young people entered a structured environment where patriotism was presented as something more than raising a flag or repeating a slogan. They lived together, they ate together, they learned discipline and civic responsibility. They participated in physical exercises, made and laid paving stones, planted trees, learned practical skills, and discovered the institutions and symbols of their country. At first glance, this may look like an unusual summer camp. Look closer, however, and a much bigger question appears. What happens when a country decides that sovereignty must be prepared for one generation before that generation is old enough to exercise it? President Ibrahim Traore has repeatedly placed young people at the center of Burkina Faso's future. His message is straightforward: the conflicts confronting the country will not last forever. When the fighting ends, another enormous responsibility begins: rebuilding and developing the nation. And the children growing up today will eventually inherit that responsibility. But this experiment also deserves serious questions. When children receive patriotic education alongside military-style discipline, where should the boundary be drawn? Can a government teach national loyalty while also raising citizens capable of independent thought? That tension makes Faso Mêbo worth examining, because this story is not simply about children wearing uniforms for a few days. It is about whether patriotism can become responsibility, whether responsibility can become national capacity, and whether Africa can prepare its next generation to protect what the present generation is struggling to build. If conversations about Africa's future matter to you, follow this channel as we examine these changes beyond the headlines. Now, let us begin with the children themselves and see how a program that started with just a few hundred participants quickly became something much larger. The scale of Faso Mêbo matters because this did not begin as a massive national program involving tens of thousands of children. It began with a relatively small group. In August 2025, the first reported camp in Ouagadougou brought together 410 children, generally between 10 and 15 years old, for approximately 10 days of training. That first group became an important test of whether children and families would accept this unusual combination of civic education, practical work, discipline, and community life. The experiment did not stop there. Another group of about 550 children participated in Grediko. Then a second group in Ouagadougou brought together roughly 730 participants. Taken together, these three reported groups amount to approximately 1,690 children. But the numbers tell only part of the story. Think about the age of these children. A 10-year-old who entered the camp in 2025 will be 25 years old in 2040. A 15-year-old will be 30. By then, some may be teachers educating another generation. Some may become engineers building roads and power systems. Others may work in agriculture, medicine, business, government, or national defense. A few could eventually occupy important leadership positions. That is why the timing of this program deserves attention. Burkina Faso is not waiting until these young people are 25 years old to begin discussing responsibility with them. The government is attempting to introduce those ideas while their understanding of citizenship, community, and national identity is still developing. Whether 10 days can create lasting change is another question, and one we must examine carefully later. But the strategy itself is clear. Prepare the future citizen before that citizen inherits the future. And this is where Faso Mêbo becomes more interesting than the number of children attending. Because once they enter these camps, they were not simply placed in classrooms and given speeches about loving Burkina Faso. They were expected to do something with their own hands. And that practical dimension may reveal the most important idea behind the entire experiment. Patriotism is easy to express when it requires only words. It becomes much more demanding when a person is asked to contribute time, effort, and physical work. That distinction appears to be one of the central ideas behind Camp Vacances Faso Mêbo. The children were not simply taught about national symbols and civic responsibility. They participated in practical activities. They learned how paving stones are made and laid. They planted trees, helped improve shared spaces, learned practical skills, and took part in activities connected to environmental responsibility and community service. Consider what that means from the perspective of a child. Words such as sovereignty and national development can sound distant at 10 or 12 years old, but a child can understand a tree planted with his own hands. He can look at a paved area and remember helping create it. He can understand that a public place remains useful only when citizens respect and maintain it. That creates a simple but powerful lesson. Love of country can carry a responsibility. This does not prove that every child who attended the camp will become a responsible citizen. No serious conclusion like that can be made after only 10 days. But the method deserves attention because it tries to connect an idea with an experience. Instead of saying only that public property belongs to everyone, let children contribute to something everyone can use. Instead of speaking only about environmental protection, let them plant and care for something living. Instead of describing service as an abstract virtue, give them practical responsibilities alongside other children. The underlying principle is participation. When people contribute to building something, they may develop a stronger sense that they also have a responsibility to protect it. For Burkina Faso, that principle reaches beyond a summer camp. A country seeking greater control over its development will eventually need citizens who see nation building, not simply as the government's responsibility, but as something ordinary people participate in as well. Yet, building with your hands is only one part of this experiment. Faso Mêbo is also trying to teach children how to live beside people whose families, wealth, and social backgrounds may be very different from their own. One of the quieter lessons inside Camp Vacances Faso Mêbo may also be one of the most important, learning how to live beside other people. Children do not enter adulthood on equal terms. Some grow up in families with money and influence. Others come from families that struggle to meet ordinary needs. One child may eventually become a senior official, while another becomes a farmer, construction worker, teacher, or mechanic. But inside the camp, the emphasis is placed on sharing the same experience. They sit together, they eat together, they train together, they follow the same rules and participate in the same activities. Ibrahim Traore specifically connected simple experiences such as sitting on the ground and eating with fellow campers to two values: solidarity and humility. That message deserves attention. A child who grows up surrounded only by comfort can reach adulthood without understanding how most citizens actually live. Wealth itself is not the problem. The danger appears when privilege creates distance between a future leader and the people that leader may one day serve. Faso Mêbo attempts to reduce that distance, at least temporarily. The lesson is not that hardship should be glorified. Poverty is not a virtue, and making children uncomfortable does not automatically produce good character. 10 days of shared meals cannot erase differences in wealth or guarantee humility for life. But experience can sometimes teach what a speech cannot. When children share food, responsibilities, physical challenges, and common rules, they encounter one another as members of the same community before they encounter one another through status. For an older generation watching these children, there is something familiar in that idea. Communities survive because people learn that personal success does not remove responsibility toward neighbors. And that may explain why solidarity receives so much attention in this program. Burkina Faso is not merely trying to prepare children to succeed individually. It is attempting to teach them that their future remains connected to the people around them. But if this were only a 10-day lesson in humility and teamwork, its significance would remain limited. The larger ambition becomes clearer when we examine how Faso Mêbo connects these experiences to education, national institutions, history, and the country's broader effort to reshape civic responsibility. The larger ambition of Faso Mêbo becomes clearer when we stop looking at the camp as an isolated vacation activity and begin looking at the broader direction of education in Burkina Faso. The children are learning more than how to follow instructions or complete physical exercises. They are being introduced to the idea that education should connect knowledge with citizenship. That connection appears in the places they visit as well. Campers have been taken to important national institutions and historical sites, including the Transitional Legislative Assembly, Ouagadougou International Airport, an air base, and the Thomas Sankara Memorial. These visits give children something a classroom lesson alone cannot always provide: a physical connection to the institutions, professions, and history of their country. Imagine being 12 years old and walking through an airport while thinking about becoming an engineer. Imagine visiting an airbase and discovering careers you had never considered, or standing at a memorial dedicated to Thomas Sankara and beginning to ask what earlier generations believed Burkina Faso could become. The purpose is not simply to tell children to serve their country. It is also to help them see where they might serve it. That fits a broader national emphasis on civic responsibility, patriotism, solidarity, community participation, and values rooted in Burkina Faso's own society. In simple terms, the country is experimenting with two forms of education at the same time. One teaches a young person what to know. The other attempts to teach that young person what responsibilities come with being a citizen. Those two goals do not always produce the same result. A country can have educated people who feel little responsibility toward public property or their communities. It can also have patriotic citizens who lack the technical knowledge required to develop a modern economy. Burkina Faso will eventually need both. And that brings us directly to Ibrahim Traore. Because behind these paving stones, shared meals, national symbols, and institutional visits is a much larger question he has repeatedly raised. When today's conflict eventually ends, who will possess the skills, discipline, and sense of responsibility required to build the Burkina Faso that comes afterward? For Ibrahim Traore, the argument behind preparing these children begins with a difficult reality. Burkina Faso is fighting an armed conflict today, but the children attending Faso Mêbo will inherit a country that must eventually move beyond war. When Traore addressed the first campus, his message was direct. They are the future of the nation. The war will eventually end, and when that day comes, they will have the responsibility of building their country. That statement reveals something important about his approach. Self-reliance in this context does not have to mean isolation from the rest of the world. Burkina Faso can trade, cooperate with other countries, receive investment, and build international partnerships. But no foreign partner can permanently replace the people required to operate a country. Someone must teach in the schools. Someone must build and maintain its roads. Someone must operate its hospitals, farms, factories, power systems, and public institutions. And ultimately, those people must largely come from Burkina Faso itself. This helps explain why Traore's broader Faso Mêbo initiative has emphasized physical construction and national participation, while the children's camp introduces similar ideas at a much earlier age. The connection is powerful. The adults are being asked to help build a country that exists today. The children are being prepared to inherit responsibility for the country that will exist tomorrow. In that sense, sovereignty becomes more than control over territory, natural resources, or political decisions. It also becomes a question of human capacity. A nation may gain greater control over its resources, but if it cannot train engineers, skilled workers, teachers, administrators, farmers, and responsible citizens, that sovereignty remains vulnerable. This may be one of the most important parts of Traore's long-term calculation. Prepare people before the country desperately needs their abilities. Yet, there is another side to this vision that cannot be ignored. When a military-led government combines patriotism, national identity, revolutionary language, and military-style discipline in the education of children, serious questions become necessary. The issue is no longer whether young people should learn responsibility. The harder question is where responsible civic education ends and political obedience begins. That question deserves a careful answer because Faso Mêbo does contain a military component. The children experience military-style discipline, physical training, organized routines, and activities designed to build endurance. Some groups have also trained at military facilities. In a country governed by military leaders and still confronting armed violence, those images naturally attract attention. But describing the entire program as military training would leave out much of what actually happens. The same children also receive civic and moral education. They learn first aid, environmental responsibility, practical construction skills, teamwork, national history, cultural activities, and respect for public property. They visit institutions and participate in community work. So the evidence does not justify automatically describing these children as young soldiers. Still, their age makes caution necessary. Most are only around 10 to 15 years old. At that stage, discipline can teach patience, responsibility, cooperation, and respect. But education should also leave room for something equally important, the ability to think independently. There is a fundamental difference between loving your country and agreeing with every decision made by its government. There is also a difference between respecting authority and believing authority can never be questioned. A strong citizen should be capable of serving the nation while still recognizing when the nation needs improvement. Patriotism should give citizens a reason to protect their country, not prevent them from asking difficult questions about its direction. That may ultimately become one of the most important tests for Faso Mêbo. Can Burkina Faso raise young people who are disciplined without becoming passive, patriotic without becoming intolerant, and united without losing their individual judgment? If it can, then these camps may offer something much more valuable than military-style routines. They may help produce citizens who understand that responsibility works in both directions. Citizens owe something to their country, but institutions also carry responsibilities towards citizens. And this brings us to the international criticism surrounding Ibrahim Traore. Western media and human rights organizations have raised serious concerns about political freedom, concentrated power, and the direction of Burkina Faso under military rule. Some of those concerns deserve to be heard, but they also raise another question. Are freedom and national capacity competing ideas, or does a successful African state ultimately need both? Criticism surrounding Ibrahim Traore should not be dismissed simply because some of it comes from Western media or international organizations. There are real concerns. Human rights organizations and foreign news outlets have raised questions about restrictions on political activity, pressure on journalists and critics, the concentration of power under military rule, and allegations of abuses committed during Burkina Faso's struggle against armed groups. Those issues matter when we examine a program designed to shape young citizens. But we must make an important distinction. There is no reliable evidence we found showing that Western governments have organized a campaign specifically condemning Camp Vacances Faso Mêbo. Most criticism is directed at the broader political environment under Traore, not at children planting trees, learning first aid, or performing community work. And this is where the debate becomes more complicated. Western observers are justified in asking whether citizens have enough freedom to criticize those who govern them. Accountability matters. Independent thought matters. No government should be considered beyond examination simply because it speaks the language of sovereignty. But Burkina Faso is asking another set of questions that cannot simply be ignored. Who will build the roads? Who will operate the factories? Who will teach the next generation? Who will maintain public infrastructure and develop agriculture? Who will create the technical knowledge required for a country to depend more heavily on its own capabilities? Political freedom alone does not train an engineer or repair a bridge. Yet, national capacity without freedom can create dangers of its own. That is why reducing this debate to Africa against the West would miss the deeper lesson. Burkina Faso does not have to choose between citizens who can think and citizens who can build. A strong nation ultimately needs both. It needs people capable of questioning bad decisions and taking responsibility for solving difficult problems. It needs accountability alongside discipline, freedom alongside responsibility, and sovereignty alongside competence. Perhaps that is the standard by which Faso Mêbo should eventually be judged. Not by whether Western commentators praise it or criticize it, and not by whether supporters of Traore celebrate every image coming from the camps. The real measure will be what kind of adults these children eventually become. And that is a question that cannot be answered after 10 days. 10 days can create a powerful memory, but building character takes years. That distinction matters when judging Camp Vacances Faso Mêbo. The children have completed demanding activities, learned civic values, worked together, and been encouraged to become examples in their schools, families, and communities. Yet there is still no strong long-term evidence showing that a 10-day camp permanently changes how these young people will behave as adults. The real evaluation should therefore begin after they leave. 1 year later, are they still participating in community activities? Do they treat public property differently? Can they still use the first aid skills they learned? Are they more willing to cooperate with people from different backgrounds? And 10 years from now, the questions become even more important. How will they respond to corruption? Will they take responsibility in their professions? Will they respect people with less money or influence? Will they contribute to their communities without waiting for the government to solve every problem? Those outcomes will tell us far more than a graduation ceremony ever could. This is also where Burkina Faso has an opportunity. Instead of measuring success only by the number of children attending, authorities could follow participants over time and determine which lessons actually remain. Because a successful national program cannot survive on enthusiasm alone. Faso Mêbo may plant the seed in 10 days. Families, schools, communities, and national institutions will determine whether that seed continues growing. And this leads to the final question. What, if anything, should the rest of Africa learn from Burkina Faso's experiment? So, what should the rest of Africa learn from Burkina Faso? The answer is not that every African country should copy Camp Vacances Faso Mêbo. Ghana does not face exactly the same circumstances as Burkina Faso. Kenya, Senegal, Botswana, South Africa, and other nations have their own challenges. A program designed for the realities of the Sahel cannot simply be copied and expected to work everywhere. But the principle deserves attention. Education should prepare children for more than examinations. Imagine young Africans learning first aid, environmental protection, community service, practical skills, national history, and responsibility alongside mathematics and science. One country might organize tree planting. Another might focus on agriculture, disaster preparedness, restoring public spaces, or helping older citizens. The activity can change. The principle remains the same. Give patriotism something useful to do. But Africa must also protect another principle. Teaching African identity should never mean teaching children not to think. A generation capable of building sovereign nations must be able to ask difficult questions, challenge corruption, evaluate leaders, and correct mistakes. That lesson matters beyond Burkina Faso. Across West Africa, the political changes associated with Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso, Assimi Goïta in Mali, and Abdourahmane Tiani in Niger have reopened major arguments about sovereignty, France, security, development, and the future relationship between African states and the wider world. Those debates will continue across the Sahel, within the African Union, and throughout African news coverage. But perhaps the deepest question is not which leader wins today's argument. It is who will be ready to lead, build, teach, farm, engineer, manage, and serve 20 years from now. A country can change an agreement quickly. It can take greater control of a resource. It can replace one international partnership with another. It cannot produce an experienced engineer overnight. It cannot manufacture responsible citizens in a factory. That work begins years before a nation desperately needs the results. Today, nearly 1,700 children from the reported 2025 Faso Mêbo cohorts give us a small window into that experiment. They planted trees, worked with paving stones, learned first aid, shared meals, experienced discipline, and studied the symbols and institutions of Burkina Faso. Whether the experiment succeeds will not be decided by what those children said when camp ended. We will know when they become adults. And I want to leave you with one question. If you could choose one skill or one value that every African child should learn before the age of 15, what would it be? Share your answer and tell us how your own country prepares its young people. And if you want to continue examining Africa's future beyond slogans and headlines, follow this channel and remain part of this conversation. We sincerely appreciate your time and support. Every video on this channel is carefully researched, thoughtfully written, and meticulously edited by our dedicated team. We don't rely on automated production or shortcuts to create our content. Every story, every visual, and every detail is crafted with genuine care, passion, and a commitment to bringing you meaningful, high-quality videos